In the month of June 2001, I got my usual copy of LEGO Mania magazine in the mail. I don't even remember what was in that issue because I was far more interested in what was included with it. Inside the wrapping that held the magazine was a DC comic book about a robot man named Kopaka. The story of Kopaka, told mostly through his internal monologues, tells the story of a hero who has arrived on an island with little more than an icy sword and a thirst for justice. Kopaka soon learns the plight of the Matoran and the Turaga who live on the island he has landed on called Matanui, and if he wants to defeat the evil that dwells within it, he must gather the masks of power and team up with 5 others like him, the Toa. This comic enthralled me. I took it to school and read and reread it over and over again. I honestly think it's one of the reasons that Kopaka is one of the top characters in the franchise. I know it's one of the reasons he's my favorite. Heck, my name, Kodak, is the name of my first ever Bionicle original character. Yeah, believe me, I was bonkers for Bonkle. In fact, I read that comic book so much that I actually wound up destroying it, which explains why I couldn't find it in my comic book collection, although I did find my old copy of Moonshot. That trigger anybody else's nostalgia? And then I discovered the Matanui online game. Granted, it wasn't the fastest playing game thanks to me being stuck on my crummy dial-up until my dad finally got DSL in time for the final chapter of the game to come out, but the game itself, sort of a Myst-like exploration game where you solve puzzles as a mysterious character known only as the Chronicler, was all about atmosphere. The game came out in parts, slowly unfolding its story and lore as it went, going from town to town, fixing problems and meeting the Toa. It was amazing immersing myself in this alien world and trying to puzzle everything together, not even knowing who my character is supposed to be. After finally confronting the intangible, malevolent force known as the Makuta, the Toa were transformed into the Toa Nuva, fended off the swarm of invading Borak in order to reclaim their stolen elemental powers, and then came the movie, Bionicle, Mask of Light. Mask of Light is okay. It tells the story of Takua, aka Yu from Matanui Online, and how he winds up becoming the 7th Toa, Takanuva, the Toa of Light, upon accepting his duty to finally defeat the Makuta. The movie is it seriously sidelines the Toa, though Kopaka does get the best scenes in the entire movie.
Roxy, washed and chilled.
And I can't help but feel a bit detached from the snarky Takua when he seemed like such a timid character in the online game when you play as him. But still, the movie was reasonably popular and good enough to keep the train going. People were hyped, anxiously awaiting what would happen next to their favorite characters, and then...
Hey, do you want to hear about when I was a kid?
And then Metru Nui happened. Metru Nui was the first big mistake LEGO made with Bionicle, in my opinion. You see, this was LEGO before the days of Ninjago, where they thought that characters had a shelf life of about 2 years, so they would rotate in new characters in an effort to keep things fresh. The problem was a lot of people were attached to the older characters and were actually kind of bothered by the fact that those favorite characters of theirs were being put on the back burner in order for old man Vakama to tell the story about when he was a kid. Taking place in Metru Nui, Bionicle 2 is about how awkward new Toa awkwardly learn to control their awkward new powers and awkwardly seal Makuta away. And there are a lot of chase scenes in it. Sorry man, but you can only get away with that when your chase scenes happen in Venice. I was sorta done with Bionicle by the time Web of Shadows came out, especially once I learned that they would actually be moving on to yet another new set of Toa once it was over, rather than the classics that I'd grown to know and love. I watched it out of fandom responsibility mostly, and didn't think much of it at the time. I honestly can't blame people who think this movie was bad. It uses the Toa Hordika, the mutated forms of the already unpopular Toa Metru. The Hordika are easily the least popular out of the Toa, and it was the last movie for a long time until... that thing came out. Cut to 2015, and while the botched relaunch of the series in Bionicle 2.0 started off with some promise, the sets were crisp and recognizable, and the lore was presentable.
I'm Gally, the fast and beautiful Amazon of the water.
But the follow-up sets were ugly. Yeah, it sadly did not get very far, but it did make me feel nostalgic enough to watch the old movies, garbage ones included. And then, when I watched Web of Shadows, I noticed something new. Something that I actually kinda liked. And then I watched it again and found something else that I liked, and then I realized that maybe there's more going on in this movie than a lot of people realized. So today, that's why I'm going to break down the things that make Bionicle 3 Web of Shadows the best Bionicle movie. In my opinion, at least. So, Web of Shadows picks up where the second movie left off. The Toa Metru were only able to save a handful of Matoran from the doomed city of Metru Nui, and now have come back for the rest. However, Vakama's recent victory and self-actualization from the last movie has made him a little bossy.
Are we gonna stand around all night? Or are we going to rescue the Matoran?
So, of course, they immediately get ambushed, overwhelmed, and captured by the Vizirek, dangerous spider creatures who have overrun Metru Nui in a frighteningly short amount of time. It's then that we meet Sidorak, the boss of the Vizirek sporting a mustache that would make Yosemite Sam blush, who learns of the captured Toa and sentences them to death, but gets stopped by Rudaka, who has other designs for the Toa.
Bring me their bodies.
And here's where we get to part one of why this movie is so good. The voice actors are clearly having a great time. Fewer things are better for a movie project than enthusiastic actors, just ask Ryan Reynolds. For another example, the dumpster fire of a show that is Donkey Kong Country is only enjoyable because of its infectious voice cast.
No bananas? That's even worse than... There's nothing worse than no bananas.
In Web of Shadows, the voice actors, or at least the ones playing the villains, seem to have been encouraged to ham it up for this silly little project. It generates some pretty fun line reads and some memorable quotes.
Leaders are judged in time by the quality of their enemies.
Of course, formalities.
However, before Sidorak and Rudaka can take advantage of their prisoners, the paralyzing venom starts to have an effect on the Toa, mutating them into beastly Toa Hordika and bursting them out of their prisons. Robbed of their elemental powers and their mask abilities by this mutation, the Toa vent their frustrations.
Matao, it's all right.
All right? You call this all right?
This creates probably the most important reason this movie is good. It is intensely character-driven, thanks partially to the fact that everything else was set up in the second film. We're not spending time establishing as much of the lore or the setting, which means that the characters get to take center stage. Take this exchange between Vakama and Matao here.
I don't hear you saying that, Smelthead. What's the matter? Too busy cooking up another master plan?
I'm through making plans.
Well, that's the first good thing I've heard since I've been hideous.
Not only is this a good set of lines, but it is probably the single most important moment in the movie and what gets the ball rolling. Matao getting frustrated with an already frustrated Vakama causes Vakama to set out on his own. Which brings us to number 3. It is this conflict between Vakama and Matao that holds the entire film together. The film frequently jumps from one set of characters to the other, either focusing on Vakama and how he considers that if he's no good as a hero, maybe he should try being a villain, and Matao's group who has joined the Elders called the Rahaga in order to find the legendary Kitangu, a being that can supposedly cure their mutations. Since the rift between Vakama and Matao is the wheel on which the entire story turns, seeing them in isolation enduring the effects of their argument keeps the story together. This all comes to a head the first time the two factions reconverge.
Our best chance to find Kitango lies within the temple. Is something wrong?
It might be best if we wait here. The Great Temple is sacred to Toa.
Given what has happened to us, I am not sure it would be right.
You know, I think we should talk about that.
No!
Yeah, never mind that the whole country is overrun by dangerous monsters. I'm sure the geriatric Rakshi will be just fine.
You don't have to understand the message, Norik. Just carry it.
This message, what is it?
And then he said, "Rag!" Why did he say that? I don't know, it didn't make much sense to me either. I don't know, maybe it's a dumb plot twist or lousy writing that the Toa wouldn't go into the ruins along with the Rahaga, or maybe it's an example of just how bad a shape the group really is in. The loss of Akama's leadership and the distrust the other Toa now have for Matao after his outburst has caused the group dynamic to break down. And that is some pretty good dramatic juice right there. A lot of memorable stories come from when a team that normally works well together finds their mettle tested, in this case left powerless, leaderless, and frustrated. And yeah, this isn't the first movie with the "ooh, the Toa need to learn how to work together or we'll never stop the bleh." This is the Toa having to relearn how to work together after their teamwork falls apart. And then we have Rudaka. Her plan for the Toa actually involves absorbing their elemental powers in order to break the seal on Makuta that the Toa had created in the previous movie. Rudaka is the one who goads Vakama into trying out his more abrasive leadership style on the Vizirek hordes in order to undercut Sidorak's influence. And of course Sidorak wants both Rudaka and Vakama under his control, while Vakama wants to off both of them in order to take over, and all these dark designs intertangle and weave together like they were some sort of... Oh my god, there goes my mind! But still, like I said before, Vakama versus Matau. That is the movie's central conflict, or it's at least the most important conflict. So many of the plot's complications come out as a result of the huge argument that these two have towards the beginning of the movie, and in order for the movie to conclude, both characters must overcome something about themselves and then reconcile with each other. This is really working! I just wish we had more of it. If the story had leaned into this conflict a bit more, having Matau getting a little more passive-aggressively vilified by the other Toa, and Vakama getting a bit more taken in by the idea that his newly unearthed leadership tactics are wonderful when used on minions instead of comrades. But in the end, it's just a cash-in film. Is it a masterpiece, or even all that great?
No.
But it does still have a lot going for it. It's worth a watch for Rudaka's overacting alone, and there are a lot of really good exchanges. Somebody on the writing staff knew what they were doing. It, like a lot of the things that LEGO creates that aren't the actual sets, are a bit weaker than the sum of its parts, but if you were like me and only watched it when it first came out of a sense of responsibility, maybe try watching it again with a bit of hindsight and a clearer head. However, I don't know if I can recommend it to non-Bionicle fans, as it takes not only a bit of understanding of the lore, but also the price of entry in the form of the second worst movie in the bunch, a position it basically gets by default. I mean, here's how the Bionicle movies stack up in my opinion. So you've got Web of Shadows at the top here, and in second place comes Mask of Light on the virtue of the Kopaka scenes alone, followed by Metru Nui. Then we have 96 videos of 8-year-olds waggling the toys in front of the camera, and then you have Legend Reborn. Yeah, that's my Bunkle movie tier list, deal with it. And don't get me wrong, I believe that Bionicle's biggest draw is the lore. It's great to read about and interact with, but I don't know if it's the best thing to watch in movie form. Mask of Light, Metru Nui, and Legend Reborn all feel like guided tours of the world, while Web of Shadows eschews that in favor of character-driven conflict, which I think was the best move. Character is story, after all, and I feel that Web of Shadows was served well in exploiting the group's friction to move the story along. And I don't just mean the boastful chest-puffing the Toa do in Mask of Light, but the raw, genuine anger that happens between Vakama and Matau early on made the perfect wedge to explore how a splintered group would work together, something that we also see in several Marvel movies. Even lore-heavy works like Lord of the Rings gets it. The first volume is called Fellowship of the Ring for a reason, you know. So, yeah, Web of Shadows might have been woven a bit thin, but I still think that there are a lot of really good things that can be learned from it. The fact that they focus on characters and how they interact rather than the lore means that they were able to tell a much more interesting story, and that might be something good to consider for anybody else who makes a film like this for another franchise in the future. It's not the lore and the things that make the story fascinating, it's how the characters grow and interact, or, as Batman puts it,
It's not the venue, it's the company.
Hey, thanks again for watching. As usual, subscribe, Patreon, ring the bell, all that jazz. But if you guys are thinking that I'm going to do anything about Bionicle The Legend Reborn in the future, don't count on it. The movie is the awkward and boring kind of bad. It's the kind that doesn't really generate a lot of material for me to work with or analyze. It's just bad. Like I said, you get more depth and more education out of stuff made by 8-year-olds. So, anyway, thanks again for watching, and until next time, this is Kodak signing off.